Welcome back to Steven Shinder reviews in video form, continuing Planet of the Ape Rule, my review series over the Planet of the Apes films in the lead up to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Wow, last day of April, I was actually able to get all of these in within the month. Wasn't sure for a little bit, but yeah, we've reached the final release prior to this new one, the end of the Caesar trilogy, War for the Planet of the Apes. Some non spoiler thoughts before going deeper into the story details. This, in my opinion, is a step up from the previous films, not just in the Caesar trilogy, but across all the Apes films. I really think this one is my favorite of the nine released. It feels like a natural progression from Rise and Dawn, and since those were somewhat analogous to Conquest and Battle, the final two films of the classic series, War does not have an entry it's similar to. It's freer to be a fresher story. It's the darkest of the films, but very character focused. How do we get such incredible stories in this and Logan in the same year back in 2017? This one came out in July of that year. Matt Reeves directed this, coming back once again, and he and Mark Bomback are the writers. This idea of showing these apes in a wintry setting is not something we've seen in apes films before. The cinematography is the most beautiful it's looked in this trilogy, and you can really see that Reeves is on his way to making The Batman, another excellent film. We even get a shot along the shore, a nice callback to the 1968 film. Since this one takes place 2 years after Dawn, I've always felt that War was more connected to Dawn than it is to Rise. The death of Koba certainly weighs on Caesar and haunts him, which I think is more effective than if Koba had survived for this one. But rewatching the entire trilogy in one go recently, I've noticed little ties here and there to Rise. Dawn widened the scope of the narrative a bit, but this feels more focused on Caesar, like Rise was, maybe even more so. The story feels more up close and intimate. It's difficult to explain this feeling. And the apes find themselves once again in a situation where they have to free themselves, taking it back to when they were in cages and Rise. Caesar recognizing that he is the one the human antagonists want most reminds me of how Caesar was the main target at the end of Rise because he's the leader. The virus also comes back more to the forefront of the conflict, as we see more of its effects on the human body. You get this human character, Colonel McCullough, whom you get to know a bit in the novel War for the Planet of the Apes Revelations, along with his son John. And there was also a War for the Planet of the Apes comic miniseries made to bridge the gap. The Colonel wants to kill any carriers of the virus as it mutates, and he sees the apes as a threat he does not want to inherit the world. It doesn't really matter that Koba, who is dead, sort of started the war between these groups. The Colonel is intent on putting the apes in their place. It gets really sad and depressing at various points in the film, but the glimmers of hope make it worth it. And I love seeing the loyalty that Caesar's friends still have for him after all these years. Spoilers for the beginning of the film. The opening text does this sort of cute thing with an opening scroll, hey, sacred scroll, highlighting the words Rise, Dawn, and War as it recaps the previous two films and contextualizes the current situation. Kinda cool, but I can also see how it might feel like a forced way of justifying the title choices. This human military group, led by the colonel, has been trying to hunt down Caesar's group ever since the radio call in Dawn. They even have their own apes on their side, which was a surprise, one of them being a gorilla named Red who used to follow Koba. I guess it's an enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing. More context for him is featured in the Revelations novel I mentioned. He and the colonel both have a hatred of Caesar. I was really shocked and not okay when the colonel, I'm just going to call him the colonel because not even sure I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. The colonel killed not only Caesar's wife Cornelia, but also his eldest son Blue Eyes. It was a bit of a relief seeing his younger son Cornelius, who's 2 years old, survived, but still such a huge loss. And like, it's like, how do you come back from that? Caesar is driven by revenge, and he asks the rest of the apes to go without him. He even hands Cornelius over so that he'll be safe. um, it's the colonel whom Caesar wants, and now it's more personal. Rocket, Maurice, and Luca end up going with Caesar, trying to lure the humans away from the rest of the apes as Caesar goes in search for the colonel. Again, I can't help but admire how Rocket, who started off as a bully and rival to Caesar, will follow him to the end at this point. Spoilers for the middle of the film. Caesar kills a military man in self defense, and his group finds the man's mute daughter, a girl who will become known as Nova thanks to a car. Yes, this is a callback to Nova from the original novel and the first couple films. She is mute because of the virus. I feel like they kind of gloss over the fact that Caesar killed her father. I'm pretty sure it's her father, but maybe he wasn't a good man. I don't know. This film does gloss over a bit here and there, but the themes are so strong that I just buy into the story. So you have these humans who are hunting apes for the narrative. It's just easier to assume, yeah, this is probably a one of the more terrible people. Just roll with it or something. Nova ends up going with the apes on their journey, and she carries this doll, which I think is a nice little reference to the doll in the 1968 film being such an important object. They find the gorilla, Winter, who'd betrayed the apes and told the colonel their location. Caesar ends up strangling Winter to death to keep him from making a sound that would give away their presence. They keep traveling and encounter a man lying in the snow who is also mute and then killed off screen. Caesar and friends meet a chimp in this Nevada zoo who can also talk. He's known as Bad Ape because it's what humans who got mad at him called him, and he lost his family a while back, left alone to tell the tale. While it's obvious to us that the virus spread around the world and made more apes intelligent, Bad Ape is what makes the characters themselves realize that they are not the only intelligent apes in the world. He also provides comic relief, but it never feels out of place in the story, in my opinion. Luca ends up getting killed, and then Caesar is captured and sees that the rest of his people have been captured as well. It's really sad seeing little Cornelius call out for him from a cage. This kid never had to experience this, and it's a situation Caesar and the older apes fought to get away from all those years ago. Caesar takes the heat when he can't stand to see another ape getting beaten. He gets in such poor conditions that he hallucinates Koba talking to him. I really like how Koba is just a ghost tormenting Caesar's spirit here. Caesar is really questioning that decision to just essentially let Koba die, which might as well just be like killing him. The colonel keeps calling Caesar so emotional and opens up in a way that feels like it doesn't have much remorse. He talks about the mutated virus and how it's affecting human intelligence and their ability to speak. He even killed his own son for being a carrier of the virus. The novelization also mentions him killing Malcolm, who tried reasoning with him to make peace with the apes. That was cut from the film, but a comic story in Planet of the Apes When Worlds Collide, from what I remember, seemed to confirm Malcolm's death, so don't really like that. I wish he'd just been able to stay out of all this. But yeah, we know the Colonel and what he's all about. I couldn't help speculating after this rewatch of the trilogy. In Rise, Caesar kills John Landon's son, Dodge Landon. And if they had the foresight of what this third film would end up being, I wonder if they would have made it so that this Colonel character would have been in charge of the shelter, maybe, because I don't really see Brian Cox in this role, not at this time. Yeah, I know he was Colonel Stryker, a very similar role, but I'm not sure he could have pulled off this Colonel role at the time that War came out. But even though it is different characters, I still think there's perhaps an unintentional um, symmetry. Would that be the right word? Or parallel, maybe? Like an interesting thing that I noticed, Caesar killed a human's son in the first film, and in this film a human kills his son and his wife. So it almost feels like a cycle type of thing. And also bear in mind that Caesar killing Dodge was accidental, and in the beginning of this film, the Colonel killing Blue Eyes and I guess Cornelia as well, there's definitely cruel intent there. But he was looking for Caesar and assuming that he was killing Caesar, but it turned out that he didn't. So not quite as accidental, it's like, it's different situation, but it's fascinating, comparing these different situations. And I think it does pay off making him a different character because, instead of having the Colonel wanting revenge for like Caesar killing his son or something, we instead get this character who's so hell bent on making sure the virus doesn't spread that he'll go through the lengths of killing his own son. And that is such a dark thing right there, and it really shows a lot about his character. Spoilers for the end of the film. Nova makes it into the camp and sees Caesar in his cage. She's not seen by the guards, but she drops the doll and it is picked up by the colonel. Maurice, Rocket, and Bad Ape manage to help the apes in their escape from this camp. It's just so great seeing that the apes are strong together and are able to work together. Caesar, who believes that he is beyond saving and just a killer who wants revenge at this point, stays behind so he can kill the colonel. When he finds him, he sees that the colonel's infected thanks to the doll and incapable of speaking. Caesar points a gun to the colonel's head, and the colonel even wants Caesar to do it because he can't stand being in this lesser state. You really feel the intensity without any words, and again, the film trusts its audience to know what's going on. Caesar, however, decides not to deal the killing blow. He puts down the gun, but watches as the colonel picks it up and ends himself. I think it might have been better for Caesar to take the gun away and to leave, and then maybe the colonel finds another one and Caesar hears the gunshot. Having him watch the colonel use the gun is not a whole lot better than Caesar using it himself, but we understand at the very least it's important to Caesar that he not kill up close and personal and lose himself again in this act of revenge. As Caesar tries to blow up the place to keep this group from hunting his kind, he nearly fails and gets killed. But Red comes to his senses and targets someone before they can kill Caesar. This leads to Red's immediate death for turning against these humans. Caesar blows up the fuel tank and the facility, causing an avalanche of snow, and the apes are able to climb up these trees and emerge triumphant. What happens next almost feels like dream logic to me as the apes journey for a while to an oasis. Everyone's happy, but Maurice notices Caesar's wound, which he's dying from. The closing words get me choked up. This is an ending that has made me cry. Caesar says, "Don't worry, Maurice, you are home now. Apes are strong, with or without me." Maurice then says, "Son will know who was father and what Caesar did for us." As Nova and Cornelius play together, Caesar sheds a tear before his death. This is definitely a callback to the final scene of Battle, in which a human and ape kid seem to be play fighting, and the statue of Caesar sheds a tear. It's so beautifully done. Again, respecting the mythology while forging its own path. Giacchino does a great job with the music once again. I remember someone in my family putting off watching War because they enjoyed the previous two films but didn't want to see Caesar die. I think it says a lot that people ended up caring so much about this CGI character. Andy Serkis brought life to Caesar, and knowing he's not a main player in Kingdom, I'm not even sure if he appears at all, even in a cameo. It adds a layer to this idea that apes are strong with or without him. It's time for other actors now. As it panned up to the sky, I was kind of expecting the first time I saw this that we'd see the astronauts from the Mars mission coming back down. I think it's smart that they didn't handcuff themselves creatively by doing that and just let this story be the present story. I did later wonder if perhaps Cornelius, the son of Caesar, and Cornelius the scientist would become one and the same in this continuity, and Nova would be an adult and be this continuity's version of a Nova who meets Taylor, maybe a 20-year time skip before the astronauts arriving instead of a drastic 2,000 years later. But as we see in the marketing for Kingdom, there's going to be a 300-year time jump, with knowledge of Caesar seemingly getting twisted. Doesn't seem like there will be astronauts, and I honestly wouldn't expect them at this point until after another trilogy is finished, which would focus on the world building. It's a chapter of ape history alluded to in the classic films, but not seen in depth on screen. So it'll be interesting seeing Kingdom's take on that kind of chapter. As for War, my score would probably be on the high end of 9 point whatever. So I'm just going to round up and say basically 10 out of 10 for War for the Planet of the Apes. It may have imperfections here and there, but the story, emotion, and character work, and how this was able to stand as a very fresh story in the franchise, it's just too good. This film and the Caesar trilogy set the bar pretty high. I'm not really sure if Kingdom will reach these same heights. I'm glad they took their time, though I think part of that had to do with the merging companies and the delays in the film industry these last few years. I'm tempering my expectations, maybe hoping for an 8 out of 10, but watching the trailers, I think it'll be at least exciting to be in the world as presented in Kingdom. I'm very curious to see how history will continue to unfold in this particular continuity. I occasionally see people online wishing we could go back to the classic continuity, or maybe go back to that style with the makeup and whatnot. It's kind of weird to me hearing those wishes. The classic continuity has been off screen for half a century. It's like wanting current live action Batman content to be like the 1966 TV show, but we have this amazing and strong new continuity, and I want to see more of the Batman to bring back the Matt Reeves connection. But we'll see how Kingdom does. It's my most highly anticipated film of this year. Been waiting for 7 years, and it's finally almost here. Thanks for tuning in, and see you around on the other side of the release of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.